All right, so this is our second meeting of the Airport Master Plan um, with the Technical Advisory Committee, or as we're calling it now, the Airport Master Plan Steering Group, or AMPSG for short. So before we get into discussing our agenda, I just wanted to talk about what the purpose of the AMPSG is. The purpose of our group is to provide input and recommendations to the City Airport Advisory Committee, as well as the City Council. We don't anticipate any formal voting on anything we discuss in these meetings. And we also want to let everybody know that the final approval authority for this master plan rests with the City Council. So I just wanted to put that out there, just in case anybody was wondering if there's any confusion. We just wanted to let everybody know. In this presentation, we will be discussing the facility requirements. We will be going over the airspace requirements, both FAR Part 77, as well as the FAA's advisory circular airspace requirements. We will be looking at the facility requirements for the runways, taxiways, airfield facilities, GA facilities, airfield support facilities, as well as the miscellaneous stuff that could benefit the airport. Then we'll move on to next steps, and we will also open up for questions, input, and comments. So with our revised project process and approach, we've had our first meeting, we call it the sponsor meeting, where we are kicking off the master plan, going over the scope of the project, and discussing needs that need to be addressed in the project. We also scheduled our inventory site visit, where we walked the airport, identified potential issues that we're going to be discussing here today, as well as other things that need to be discussed in the master plan. We had our first meeting with the AMPSG, where we conducted a SWOT analysis. We talked about some potential goals and visioning that should be discussed with the master plan. We also had our meeting with airport management, where we went over operational data, that's total operations, aircraft operations, as well as the base aircraft count. And we worked with airport management as well as the FAA to come up with a potential forecast of operations and base aircraft growth. Right now we are in our fourth meeting. This is what we're calling our investigation part 2, where we will be discussing specifically facility requirements today, as well as airport design standards. And then our upcoming meeting, we'll be discussing airport development planning, and at that point be preparing our airport layout plan. The final process of this master plan is discussing the phasing and implementation, more specifically looking at the airport's 5-year CIP and discussing any projects pending city approval that could be added to the 5-year CIP. And then the final process of reviewing with the city, airport management, as well as the FAA and FDOT to get a final airport layout plan, or ALP, and master plan document approved. So you're going to see this graphic throughout every presentation we do, just showing where we are, and we're always open to answer any questions throughout this process. Okay, so getting into the airport facilities overview. This airport has 2 runways. It has 7 taxiways. The 2 runways are runway 1028 and runway 523. This airport, also the major tenants at this airport are the U.S. Department of Forestry. They have an air tanker base facility at this airport for air firefighting. The MRO located at this airport, on the southeastern portion of this airport, is HAECO. So to give an overview of the airport facilities in terms of the hangars and operations, currently this airport has 20 T-hangar units, all of which are occupied. And there's currently a hangar waiting list for T-hangar units of 8 aircraft owners. For corporate hangar units, there are 6 available at the airport. or six, I should say, occupied by aircraft owners at this airport, and there's a hangar waiting list of 7 aircraft owners. There's currently 6 box hangar units at this airport, all of which are also occupied, and there's 6 aircraft that are currently parked on the parking apron. All of these are referred to as based aircraft, or aircraft that are based specifically at Lake City Gateway Airport. For 2020, the total operations that were counted were 29,000 total operations. And discussing the forecast further with the airport management, there's a potential that this airport can grow to 45 based aircraft and just a little over 34,000 total operations. Another piece to this forecast is looking at the existing and ultimate critical aircraft, or the largest aircraft that operates at this airport, or specifically in this case, aircraft group. And we found that it was a Group 3, and the largest Group 3 that we saw was an Airbus A320. And then also there's a Group 4 aircraft that operates at this airport, and that's a 767-3. This information has been forwarded to the FAA and FDOT and is pending approval. But this information is essential to our next discussions that we'll be having with you guys for airport development alternatives. So before I continue, just want to break here. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, I will continue. So moving on to our airspace requirements, starting with FAR Part 77. These are airspace requirements that put restrictions off the ends of runways, around the runway, as well as above the airport. These restrictions are carried out through surfaces or imaginary surfaces. The imaginary surfaces are dictated based off of the aircraft type or size, as well as the approach visibility minimums for both runways, in this case, runways 1028 and runway 523. So in terms of the visibility minimums, we have instrument approach minimums, as well as visual approach minimums. The instrument approach minimums essentially is equipment that is in the pilot's cockpit that allows the pilot to land during inclement weather. Whereas on the other hand, visual approach is where the pilot can visibly see the runway during a clear day where there isn't any inclement weather. So currently at Lake City Gateway Airport, runway 1028 is the only runway with an instrument approach procedure, more specifically a non-precision instrument approach procedure, where the equipment will guide the pilot into a runway based on if they're either too far left or too far right from the runway. So moving on to the second piece for the airspace at Lake City Gateway Airport is the FAA's ACE Advisory Circular. And for the FAA's Advisory Circular, just like the FAR Part 77, the geometries for the surfaces are based off of the aircraft type or size, as well as the approach visibility minimums. The difference between Part 77 and the AC is that for the FAA's AC, these surfaces are only off of the ends of runways. Whereas Part 77, you have surfaces off the ends of the runways, as well as around the runway and above the airport. So moving on to the pavement assessment, the Florida Department of Transportation has a pavement management program where the pavement is assessed by what is called the Pavement Condition Index, or PCI. So the thing to note here with PCI is it's a numerical system from 0 to 100, where 0 means the pavement is failed, and 100 means the pavement is in good to excellent condition. So currently looking at Lake City Gateway Airport, the pavement for runways 1028 Taxiway Alpha, Taxiway Bravo, Bravo 1 is listed in good to satisfactory condition. The pavement for the rest of the airport is listed uh, as fair, poor, or very poor. So this is something that we're definitely going to explore as we go throughout this master plan, looking for options to bring the pavement condition up to satisfactory to good. All right, so getting into our facility requirements, we're going to start with runways. So with the runways, we identified a lot of different issues or things that could benefit the runway that we need to explore. But starting with some of the more pressing issues that we need to explore are the runway safety area, or RSA, and runway protection zone, or RPZ, deficiencies off of runway 10-8. So essentially, the runway protection zone, or RPZ, is set up to protect occupants or people in buildings off the ends of runway. The RSA, on the other hand, is set up to protect the aircraft and occupants on the aircraft. So there are different ways that we can solve these issues, and this will be explored once we get into our development alternatives. The other deficiency to note here is the runway designation for runway 523. So the runway designation is based off of the magnetic bearing of a runway. In this case, for 523, it's heading 50 degrees or 230 degrees. But as time goes on, we have something that happens referred to as magnetic declination, which is the angle between true north and magnetic north. So with the magnetic declination occurring constantly, the true bearing of runway 523 is actually sitting in a heading of 60 degrees and 240 degrees currently today. So a runway designation change should happen in the short term to rename the runway 624. Moving into taxiway deficiencies, geometrically starting with Bravo 1. Bravo 1, which is the top graphic, currently intersects with runway 5, but FAA requirements recommend that taxiways, especially if they're referred to as entrance or exit taxiways, are joined perpendicularly to the runway end. So in the case of Lake City and taxiway Bravo 1, this is not an atypical condition because Lake City Gateway Airport, like a lot of GA airports, were used during World War II. So taxiway Bravo 1 actually used to be a runway, and it was converted into a taxiway. So we're also going to be looking at different alternatives that we can solve this issue where we can get taxiway Bravo 1 adjoined to the runway 5 end. We are also looking at pavement markings. More specifically, just adjacent to taxiway Alpha off the runways 10 and 28 ends are run-up pads where pilots can park their aircraft and do run-up operations, testing their aircraft, looking at their equipment, making sure that everything is good to go prior to their takeoff. So the markings on the run-up pad currently are non-movement area markings, and these markings are more appropriate for delineating between a taxiway and a taxi lane. So the more appropriate marking here would be an intermediate holding position marking. So this is something that we're also going to be exploring further as we go in our master plan. So let's move on to airfield facilities. Now, airfield facilities, this includes navigational aid equipment. This also includes weather equipment. And we always typically recommend performing maintenance on this equipment. But more specifically for Lake City, the the Automated Weather Observation System, or AWOS, provides wind data to the National Climatic Data Center. This wind data is used to see the wind occurrences on the runways to dictate what is the primary runway at your airport. Now, in the case of Lake City, some of the sensors in the AWOS are not accurately reporting this wind data to the NCDC. So using requirements by the FAA, we were able to pull wind data from a nearby airport. So this is something that we definitely need to look at on how we can solve this issue. Some of the other issues I have noted here are good things to improve the runway, such as improving the approach visibilities from a non-precision instrument approach on runway 28 to an ILS approach, where pilots will have the guidance, where they will have vertical guidance that tells them how high they are during landing operations, as well as the same horizontal guidance that they currently have. And then other maintenance operations that just occur at an airport through just the general wear and tear that may happen. Moving on to the general aviation facilities. This is where our forecast really starts to come into play. So pending FAA approval right now, based on our forecast and as well as the hangar waiting list that currently is at this airport, we've identified the need for 12 additional T hangar units, 8 additional corporate hangar units, and 1 additional box hangar. Now, this area that I have identified here is the general aviation area of the airport. Where these hangars can go is still open. We have not planned anything. We have not discussed where these hangars can go. So I just wanted to make sure that I explain that and identify where the general aviation area is. But what is needed is these additional hangars to address specifically the hangar waiting list that is currently at this airport. Moving on to airfield support facilities, more specifically looking at the current passenger terminal. So right now, itinerant operations or operations that are coming from elsewhere, during a peak day, peak time, the busiest time of day and the busiest time of week, there's currently not enough public space for pilots and passengers during those times. So sometime during, as we say, the 20-year planning period, we're recommending that there be expansion to this terminal. Again, we will be discussing this further with airport management, and this is also as demand persists. So when this happens, it will be when it starts to really become an issue. And last but not least, looking at our facility requirements, we always have a miscellaneous category. This is looking at the perimeter fence as well as the gates at this airport. The best way to secure your airport is to have magnetic sliding gates. So one of the recommendations we always mention to our airports is replacing padlock gates with magnetic sliding gates. Another recommendation we always recommend is implementing a security plan if one is not currently implemented. And last is conducting a wildlife hazard assessment, or in the case of Lake City, a wildlife site visit to identify potential harmful wildlife that can impact airfield operations. So these are the facility requirements that we will be exploring further. This is only a snapshot into the facility requirements. We will have a full section of our master plan that goes into these in a lot more detail. But before I move on to just the next steps of what we're anticipating for this project, I want to open this up to questions because there's a lot of information that I covered here. And I'm sure that some people have some questions. Okay, well, talk about next steps. I'll be working with airport management as well as the city with scheduling the next meeting. Right now, we're anticipating the next meeting to be in December 2021. In that meeting, we'll be discussing development alternatives. We also are working with the FAA to finalize the critical aircraft and forecast approval. So once we have that, we will definitely let everybody know. And then the final steps are putting the master plan document together as well as the airport layout plan. And if the master plan document tells the story of an airport in a narrative form, the AOP tells the story of the airport in a visual form. So with that, I'm going to open up for any questions, comments, recommendations, or concerns that anybody has.
Hey, Chris, this is Steve Coley. Just back,
Hey, Steve.
Back on slide 15, the existing critical aircraft for Group 3 is going into 2022 and beyond. It's going to be an A321, and Group 4 would be a 767-400.
Okay. Thank you for that change, Stephen. I appreciate it. Okay. Is there anybody else? Any questions, comments, anything? Please speak freely. Okay. Well, with that, I'm going to hand it back over to the city. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. Should anybody have any questions at all, please feel free to contact me, contact Florence Straw at the airport, and I'll do my best to get back to you in a timely fashion, answer any questions that you may have. And again, we're anticipating that our next meeting will be in December of 2021. I hope to see everybody back there at that meeting. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Okay, Chris, thanks again. Future topics and scheduling the next meeting.
Any dates?
No, just like I said, whenever y'all to come up with decide a date, just let me know.
Okay, well,
whatever works for everybody.
Get the dates coordinated, and we'll contact everyone in the group.
That will be in December, correct?
In December.
Okay.
Is there a better day that's better for everyone, time of day?
Is this a good time?
4 o'clock is good for me.
I can make whatever work.
Okay.
Yeah, good.
So we'll shoot for perhaps a Thursday around 4. And then we'll contact everyone to find out what your schedule is and what conflicts